Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today, we're back with PR specialist and CEO of Flow Publishing, Eve Bailey. Hey, Eve, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure, sure. So, today I want to talk all about media coverage with you. Eve, what would you say are the basics that authors need to have to be prepared for media coverage?
That's a great question. So if you've already been booked, right, and you have an interview coming up, there's a lot that you need to do ahead of time to make sure that you are ready to crush that interview. The first thing I would do, and I'll use a podcast as an example, just because it's kind of an easy one that we all know about. Let's say a podcast reaches out to you and says, you know what, Sophia, I absolutely love your book. I want to have you on the show. Can you join me at this time? The first thing that you want to do, and this is what I recommend to all my clients, is you watch the last two episodes of that podcast and you learn what is what is the process, how is a show produced, is it question and answer, how many guests are there, and get really familiar with the kind of questions that you're going to be asked. And the reason that I say this is so many shows are so different, right? Most shows that I find that the authors go on are typically an interview format, but some might be a panel, right? And you might have other authors that are there with you, and you might have to jockey to get your word in edgewise, right?
Right.
Or it might just be a super easy two-person interview, or you might have an interviewer who's actually like really tough and you want to be prepared to make sure that you have the answer to your questions. So you want to make sure that before you go on that interview, you have a good sense of what that interview might look like. And then, you want to go through the basics, right? You want to make sure that you can articulate your book correctly, that you've got your elevator pitch down. You're probably going to get some personal questions. Be prepared to answer those. And then the other thing that's super important too, and it's the little things. And we actually, we have a kind of like a group of authors that we work with at my company to like help train them to go on interviews. And one of the things that we do is you need to make sure that you're a great guest, right? And that's doing the little things, showing up on time, looking presentable, making sure that you thank the host, right? Another really important one, having a great microphone, making sure that when you're talking to the interviewer that you're not interjecting, and just making sure that you're a really good guest so you can come back multiple times, right? When you go on a show, you want them to do, one of two things, actually three things. You want them to hopefully buy your book. You want that show to actually be like, man, Sophia was so cool. I loved having her on, right? I'm going to push out all these clips on social media to promote the interview, right? You want to get that social promotion. And then the third thing is you want them to invite you back, right?
Right.
So if I was an author, that's kind of how I would approach that upcoming interview.
That's fantastic. I think that's great insight about just being prepared and being totally likable because it's always going to benefit you. Now, when are the best weeks of the year to push out media coverage?
Great question. So, when are the best weeks of the year to push out media coverage? The best way for me to actually answer this is by telling you what the worst weeks are. The worst weeks to push out media coverage or to launch a product or to launch a book, I would say election week. Just assume during election week that nothing you say matters unless you're writing a political book. And even if you are writing a political book, it's basically completely shot from a media perspective. I had a former client many years ago who wrote kind of like a political fiction, and he was like, let's do this during election week and let no. Just not a good time. There's other things going on, and while you might think that this is a great opportunity because your book is inherently political, it's probably not at the top of the news docket. Another terrible week is going to be Christmas. Most people and most journalists are not doing anything during Christmas, especially podcasts. A lot of times podcasts will actually take a break for 2, 3 weeks during the Christmas season. So those are the absolutely worst weeks. In terms of days, Friday is never a great day to put out a story. If you've ever heard of something called the Friday news dump, that's because all the bad news comes out on Friday, right? That's when people get fired, laid off. Friday is kind of exclusively for the day. If you have a bad story that you need to get out there, that's the day you leave it to die. But I always prefer Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Those are my favorite kind of media days. And then Saturday, Sunday, also not a good time to launch a story.
That's very helpful. And can small authors typically get media coverage?
Can small authors get media coverage? Absolutely. And I think that that's a huge myth that has kind of been circling around that if you haven't sold 30,000 books and you're not, published with HarperCollins and on the New York Times bestseller list, that you can't get media coverage. That's not true. There's kind of two ways that I would go about it, right? If you're a nonfiction author, you should be positioning yourself as an expert in your field, right? So if you're writing about, I don't know, real estate, right? You should be positioning yourself as an expert in real estate to go on real estate shows to share your knowledge and then promote your book. If you're a fiction author, you should be looking at all of these genre podcasts that are out there. This is a huge untapped market for fiction authors, especially ones that are self-published and are I would say like smaller authors. There are so many fan-based podcasts who are talking about fantasy, romantasy, horror, sci-fi, and they're looking for authors of great books to talk to. And this is where your readers are, right? So, there's a kind of a misconception out there where it's, can you get me on the Today Show to talk about my book? It's like, okay, well, the person watching it is probably going to be getting for work, brushing their teeth, not really paying attention, and they probably don't even read romantasy or whatever your book is about, right? Go to where your readers are, who are going to binge your content and become loyal consumers.
Now, should an author say yes to every interview?
Should an author say yes to every interview? That's a really good question. Every time that a client of mine or even a friend of mine that's an author, I have a lot of friends that are authors, get an interview request, you have to do your research, right? You have to at least if you're doing a, podcast, radio, TV interview, you need to watch the last two episodes and know what you're getting into. If it's a print interview, you need to read their articles on, books or whatever they're talking about. Because here's the sad thing about media. Not all media is nice. It's definitely not as scary as people will make it seem to be. But unfortunately, there are some journalists out there who are not acting in good faith. So it's in your best interest to make sure that you do your research before you commit to an interview, commit to a podcast, make sure that it's on brand with you, right? Like let's say you're a Christian author, right? And a podcast reaches out to you and there's a lot of swearing or it's just not on brand for you, right? You can say no to that interview. It's okay. Just say, oh, I'm so grateful that you reached out, but unfortunately, I don't have the ability to do this interview at this time. It's all right. There's a million other people out there. They won't be heartbroken.
And that's interesting when you're thinking about genre and whether you fit. Now, say
Yeah.
you get invited to go on a smaller podcast or media channel. Is it worth it even if they're smaller?
So this is a great question that I get from authors all the time. Should you go on a podcast even if it's smaller? And if you're someone who is so busy that they are barely finding time to brush their teeth, right? Like or like get out the house in the morning, don't bother. But if you have time, there are a lot of small podcasts out there where you can make it worth your time, right? Number one, you're making a connection with a guest who obviously is super psyched about either your genre or your field, right? They're an expert in your field. They might be able to connect you with, good beta readers or good reviewers. I kind of take the approach of, showing up as half the game and like everything good happens after that, right? But the other good thing about going on smaller shows is you can also get social media clips, right? So like let's say a show is on YouTube and they got 25 subscribers, but they're pumping out tons of social media content. That's great. You can repurpose it for your social media channels. You can repurpose it for ads. It's not a lost opportunity if they have a smaller audience because you can actually make their audience bigger and your audience bigger by promoting their show.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that's what I had been thinking about. And what would you say an author should do if they don't know the answer to a question when they're being interviewed?
This is a really, really great question. So, if an author is being asked a question that they don't know in an interview, there's a few different ways that you can handle this. If it is a podcast interview, most likely that show is going to be edited at a later point. So if you have a friendly host and it's, not that big of a deal, it's more of a casual conversation and you don't know the answer, you can say, honestly, do you mind if we just, remove this question? I actually don't really know the answer to this right now. Or you can say, hey, I really like that question. I'm just not really an expert in that specific, topic. Do you mind if we just like not? And they'll probably just take it out of the interview and it will be no issue. If you're being interviewed by a print journalist, this is where it can get a little stickier, right? Especially if you have a nonfiction book that even might be, I don't want to say controversial, but controversial. This could be like where it gets a little sticky, and they ask you a question about maybe a claim that you made in your book. The best way to kind of circle back on this is basically to say, you know what, hey Sophia, that's a really great question, and I hadn't thought of that. I want to give you the best possible answer. So do you mind if I just get your email address and I can follow up with you after this call of an answer to that? That kind of removes you from having to answer on the spot, and you can follow up via email with a much more prepared response. Most journalists, unless they're acting in bad faith, they want a good response from you. They don't want like a half-baked answer. If they ask you what color the sky is and you don't know and you say purple, it just makes them look silly for interviewing somebody who thinks that the sky is purple, right?
Right.
So take a beat. It's okay to ask to follow up with them at a later time. When you're in a live interview, that's where it gets a little bit more dicey. But most authors, especially when they're starting out, they're probably not going to be on live TV. But if you are, that gets into a whole other conversation about pivoting and this and that. But we can kind of hit that at another time.
Well, Eve, thank you so much. That was wonderful insight on media coverage.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's interview with PR specialist and CEO of Flow Publishing, Eve Bailey. Be sure to check out our website for more videos. Wishing you all a fulfilling and successful writing journey.